Today we're going to look at, today and tomorrow, we're going to look at two of the most graphic scenes in the Bible. Now, they're not intensely described, but they are scenes that will make us look and say, wow, that's pretty intense. And they're also scenes that may challenge us about what we believe. Are you in a situation where you may say, gee, I'd like to go to church today, but, kind of busy and I really, got a lot to do, and you know how it is. Or how about this one? I'll start going to church when I finish getting my doctorate degree. Now, I want you to think about that, because what we're looking at, we're continuing the book of Maccabees, and actually the books of Maccabees, and we're in 2nd Maccabees. And I told you yesterday and gave you a more modern version of what was going on. But I told you yesterday about the Vatican's review of, what's his name? Father Francis de Mello. Well, and one of the questions was, how well defined is God in some of his writings? Because I think he draws upon some Hindu ideas. And this is an important distinction when we look at that, because we've got to realize that difference between what we believe and what other faiths believe. And when we understand that difference, we can understand when we see something and we can recognize, well, this is religion, this must be good. We can say, however, that's true, but what we want is that which we actually specifically believe, so that we can define it so that we can understand it within its definition even more. Do you see what I'm saying? So let me give you maybe a better example of this. So when I was at the University of Massachusetts at Boston, I was having lunch with an Assembly of God minister. Great guy. We really hit it off very well. Well, at the time, there was basically a cult that was running around in the Boston area. So anyway, what we know is we're sitting there having lunch, and generally, if you really look at it, a lot of times outside of a parish setting, you don't have anyone walk up to you and say, would you like to come to a Bible study? It's generally not within Catholicism, something that happens. But it does happen within other Christian religions. So there we were having lunch, and this guy walks up to us and he says, would you like to come to a Bible study? And the Assembly of God minister looked at him and said, what's the denomination? And the guy says, well, it's Christian. No. What's the denomination? Well, it's Christian. Well, what's the denomination? And he kept pushing him on it. What's the denomination? What's the denomination? And turned out it was, finally he relented and said, it's this church, which we understood was the cult. So, and people were drawn into it. And one of the tactics they would use, by the way, and this is completely unacceptable, and if it happens within the Catholic Church, this is completely unacceptable. Someone would recognize that they were in a cult and that this was the wrong place to be. And they were given a spiritual advisor, so-called, and they were really kind of like monitors for them, and they would always make sure they stayed in the cult. Well, if the person said, well, I'm not sure this is the right religion, they would say, well, then you have to tell me and draw me out of this religion, because if you don't, and we're in the wrong religion, you're condemning my soul to hell. You see how a misunderstanding of hell can become very manipulative? Got to be very careful of that, even within Catholicism. So the Assembly of God minister explained to me, he said, when someone asks you to go to a Bible study, you always ask the denomination, because it can draw you into some pretty bad places if you don't understand what they're connected to. And I was fascinated by this whole thing. Well, one of the things we want to look at when we're looking at today's reading, remember, this is only in a Catholic Bible, we're looking at 2nd Maccabees. And remember what we talked about yesterday. It was, let's build one big happy religion, just kind of take a little bit of all the religions and build one big happy religion. And in doing so, we'll make a peaceful world. Well, again, that would mean that you have to disregard certain things you believe in. And many people among the Jewish community went along with this. It's going to happen if they did it. I told you yesterday, if they did it in Rome, then many people within the Catholic community would have gone along with it. So, so it has nothing to do with being Jewish. But there they were. They were trying to build this one big happy religion. And that makes basically what it says when you do that is religion is not true. Or your religion is not true, because you're changing the teachings based on something capricious. So this is what happens. And so what we're looking at today's reading, today and tomorrow, are some pretty intense scenes. They don't actually describe, actually I think they do. Anyway, pretty intense scenes of torture based on forcing today an older man, and tomorrow, seven brothers, forcing them to be tortured to death for not accepting this religion. But what was the sign they would accept this religion? Really simple: eat a pork dinner. That was it. I mean, you can imagine that. There you are sitting at the table. You've got the guards all around you saying, just eat this, will you? Would you just eat this? And that's essentially what they said. All around you. And there you have the older man sitting there, and he's got in front of him pork chops, mashed potatoes, and peas. And all he has to do is eat that, and he'll be fine. But if he doesn't eat that, he'll be tortured to death. And there's nothing wrong with the food. The food is fine. It's probably the best prepared food around for this reason. And he refuses. And someone says, well, what we can do is, and you have to realize that the guards around him are begging him. They don't want to torture him to death. They're begging him to just eat it, because it's really, to them, it's really simple. And he's saying, no, don't you understand? If I eat this, then I'm rejecting my God. And they said, well, what if you told people that it was a substitute? It wasn't real pork. He says, it doesn't matter. I think that's what he says. Let me just check to make sure that's what he says here. He says it doesn't matter, because if you, it was pretend to eat it. Just pretend you're eating it. Because all he had to do was have one forkful. That was it. He didn't need to eat the whole meal. He just needed to have one forkful. And he says, no, because even if I pretend to do it, then people will see that I chose not to do it. I chose, to eat the pork. They'll still believe that. And then I am leading people astray. Really intense scene. It's one of the most intense scenes in the Bible in general. And so this is where he really says, no, I believe in what I believe. And I'm not going to deny that. So it's an important consideration. Now, when someone says if someone says that same idea, well, it's all the same. Well, no, it isn't. But we also have to be careful of the opposite side. And that's why we have a Vatican. That's why we have a Pope. Because the opposite side, which you see all over social media, is people teaching you what is not Catholic teaching. That's the opposite side. You got to be very careful of that, because these are people who will teach you, for example, things like what they will call, which is, I consider a derogatory term, the actual, not the real name. It's called the Vatican II Mass, which is actually called the Pope Paul VI Mass. They'll call it the Novus Ordo Mass, and they will say, if you go to the Novus Ordo Mass, then you are going to a false Mass. Or they will say that there is no Pope, there hasn't been a Pope. These people actually say this since Pope Pius XII. And they will continue these kind of teachings. The vast majority of people are going to hell. All these things. And that is not what the Vatican teaches. And if you listen to them and you see and you choose to follow them, well, they're on the opposite end, but they're two sides of the same coin. They're the super strict people who are teaching you a faith that is incorrect. And from them, you will generally not hear of a merciful God. You'll hear a very stern, judgmental God who is ready to cast you into hell. What you're going to hear from them is sinners in the hands of an angry God, which I've talked about a lot here. So that's why we have a Vatican, to understand what it is the church actually teaches. The other day, Bishop Strickland said that he had a prophecy, which he wrote on Twitter, which was an attack on the bishops. Well, in Catholicism, there are ways to study, not so much study, but ways to see whether or not this is a legitimate prophecy, which I don't believe it is. Bishop Strickland and his followers believe they are, but I don't. And you can look at, well, how do we know? Because the church has systems of discernment in place. And who knows? If the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith happens to see this, they may investigate it and say, not investigate in the doctrine, in the teaching so much that came from Bishop Strickland, and investigate whether or not this is a legitimate prophecy. But we have the Vatican there to help us to understand what the church actually teaches. And this is an intense reality. This is something we really have to understand. What does the church actually teach? And so remember, for example, when you are watching when you're watching these online channels, and there are these Catholic channels, they don't have what is known as a nihil obstat. And maybe I should explain that, because what is a nihil obstat? A nihil obstat basically is Latin for there is no obstacle. Basically, what it means is there's nothing there that is contrary to faith in morals. People will say, well, someone put their imprimatur on it. And if you look at a Catholic book that has the proper documentation, you'll see that they will say nihil obstat and then the name of a bishop, and imprimatur and the name of a bishop. Sometimes, and I've seen this recently with a catechism, not the catechism or any other catechism from the Vatican, but a catechism from a bishop, I noticed, unless that's been changed, that it didn't have a nihil obstat, but it had an imprimatur. Well, what's the imprimatur? Imprimatur is giving it permission to be printed. That's an imprimatur. A nihil obstat means there's no obstacle in faith or morals in the book. So I noticed it didn't have a nihil obstat, which means that there wasn't a bishop who would say, besides obviously the one who wrote it, said that there is no obstacle there. And I don't think they could, because I think there were some serious obstacles in that. But there was a bishop who gave him imprimatur, said, I'm giving it permission to be printed. Well, the real serious of the two, they're both serious, but the more serious of the two is the nihil obstat. It is one bishop saying there is nothing against faith and morals in this book. Now, there are things that could be factually incorrect, but they're not against faith and morals. There could be a legendary story in that. For example, you might have a story that someone met Jesus on the way to on the way to France. They were walking along and they tell their story of meeting Jesus. And you might see, this is off the top of my head, but there are books like this. And you might see a nihil obstat in that. That means that there is nothing in the book that's against faith and morals. It does not mean that the bishop is saying that that story of meeting Jesus on the way to France was true. Do you understand? It's just nothing was said that's against faith and morals. This is why we have a Vatican, to help us to understand what in fact is true and what in fact may not be related to our faith. This is why you be careful of anyone who is speaking off the cuff, or telling you what they believe, including me. If you have something that you disagree with me, you can turn around and I disagree with that. That's fine. That's good. And but you want to be careful that you don't get manipulated through this process, and that's why we have a Vatican. We'll be right back right after this. Did you know that you can listen to Catholic Audio Media on the iHeartRadio app? Catholic Audio Media is now available through your iHeartRadio app. If you don't have the app, download it to your smartphone, tablet, or computer and subscribe through the podcast tab to Catholic Audio Media. You can also enable them through your smart speaker and hear them through the smart speaker as well. Just ask for Catholic Audio Media podcast from iHeartRadio. You can hear them anywhere. You can listen to them as you're jogging. You can listen to them as you're preparing to go to bed. You can listen to them as you're eating and having breakfast or lunch or dinner. You can hear them anytime you want at iHeartRadio through the iHeartRadio app. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. So before the break, I was talking to you about being careful of being manipulated because people can use their teaching to manipulate you. What are the ways you can tell? Well, what did I tell at the beginning of the story? They can manipulate you by saying things to you that scare you and force you into doing what they say. Okay? Now, notice what this story is about. An older man is given a pork dinner, right? And told that either he eats the pork dinner or pretends he eats the pork dinner. Or he'll be tortured to death. That's scaring him to do something he doesn't believe. Okay? Always be careful of that. If you teach someone that God is, doing this off the top of my head, God is so merciful that they will forgive the worst of all sinners if they repent just before they die, which, by the way, is church teaching, then you will end up in hell in their place. That's manipulation. Be careful of anyone, especially if they use hell as a way of manipulating you. You better do this or you will go to hell. What is the commandment that Jesus says? Love God, love neighbor. How is it that someone goes to hell? I teach this all the time. By choosing to reject God to their dying breath. Do you understand? So, you know the guy who just robbed you and was going to steal something from you? Do you know that guy who was going to rob you and steal from you? You can't say he is going to hell until he chooses all the way to his dying breath to reject God. People disagree with that, but that is absolutely church teaching. Who turn and beg for the mercy of God. That is church teaching. So anyone who, this is, and the situation that I'm thinking of is exactly the scenario that I bring in. It was someone who was going to steal, I think it was their phone or their wallet or something, and they pulled out a gun and were ready to shoot them. And the guy, just ran away. Oh, I remember what it was. Here it was. They were going to, I think it was an iPhone they were going to sell or something like that. And this guy said, oh, this is cool. And he's holding it. And then all of a sudden he runs. Guy runs after him, pulls out a gun, is ready to shoot him. You're actually going to kill someone for stealing your iPhone. You're actually going to do that. Sorry, I don't see how that is acceptable within Catholic teaching. because you want to give that person the chance to end up in heaven, and you don't want to take that away from them, and you don't want to stand before the throne of God. I guess I'm using this term, but this is what I truly believe. And say, well, yeah, he was going to steal my iPhone. That's why I killed him. Whoa, wait a minute. His life is not as valuable as an iPhone. We're called to be people who teach people the mercy of God so that they will understand that there is heaven and that they can go there. And so you want to be careful of any kind of manipulation that leads you to turn away from church teaching, right? So where do you find church teaching? You find it from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is the Vatican II Catechism. The Catechism of the Council of Trent, by the way, is still valid, and the two of them supplement each other. Anyone tells you we don't have to listen to Trent anymore. Well, the two of them supplement each other. The Vatican II's foundation is the Council of Trent. And so when you look at the two of them together, then you understand that there is more direct, more intense teaching. Do you understand? So the two of them together give you the intense teaching. So do you realize that? And you have to also look at things within the context of science and faith. One of the things that we're looking at today is there are certain things that the church declares are sinful. And people will say, that's ridiculous. Science says it's okay. The church comes out and says something interesting. They said, yes, we know what science says. And we're not disagreeing what science says, but we don't speak on science as a church. We speak on moral issues, and we will stand on those moral issues. Now, the gravity of the moral issues depends on the agent and where he is or she is in their psychological makeup and their maturity and everything else. But we're not going to change the teaching because they are rooted in moral issues, even if science says, no, this isn't the same thing. So do you understand? That's what the Vatican's there for, to help you to understand what is essentially God's word, help you to discern. That's why that tweet the other day from Bishop Strickland hasn't gone through the process to determine whether or not it's accurate. It needs to be studied by the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. So he says, yeah, but this bishop said that. Well, Bishop Lefebvre also turned away from the church. So do you understand that? So we have to see everything within context, because that is the unity. And that's why we have a Vatican, to help us to understand what the church actually teaches. Now, if we go back to this reading, we're going to see that important message where this man, obviously he didn't have the Vatican behind him, but obviously said, but you realize that if I do, in order to avoid torture, if I do what these guards around me want me to do, that I'm teaching to my own people an incorrect statement, that it's okay to eat pork. But we are standing there representing the kingdom of God, and God has told us not to eat pork. This is the Jewish law. Do you understand? So, and this, by the way, remains the law of the believers in God until Christianity comes along and St. Paul or St. Peter has a message from God, which he explains to the other apostles, and they all agree that this is true, that law no longer applies. So Eleazar is his name. He is testifying not just to the fact he shouldn't eat pork, but to his belief in God, that there is a God, that God is real, and the God of the Jews is not the God of the Greeks, who are trying to change all religions to be the same. This is why it's important. I told you right now I'm reading the Bhagavad Gita. That has helped me to further understand what I actually believe as a Christian. On my Patreon page, no, actually on catholicaudiomedia.substack.com, I see that an article I wrote where I criticized a bishop who wrote something that I Absolutely. At the very least, I'm not saying the teaching was wrong, even though I believe it was. I'm saying it was expressed wrong. It was clearly expressed wrong, but he's not a native English speaker, the person who originally wrote it, and it's translated. But in any case, I lost a subscriber over on my Substack because of that. They didn't like what I wrote. Okay, that happens. It happens all the time. But what's more important is I don't believe anything I said would contradict what the Vatican teaches. And that's an important distinction. And you need to realize that. Anyone who tells you that Vatican II is wrong, don't believe Vatican II, or we only, even if they say, well, we don't believe Vatican II is infallible, so we don't have to believe in it. That's not true. That's not true, because this is what the church presently teaches and will continue to teach, and we believe that was inspired by the Holy Spirit. So you don't have the right to say this is not valid Catholic teaching if the Catholic Church teaches it. There's an old expression, I remember when these fights were really big towards the early days of Vatican II. You cannot be more Catholic than the Catholic Church. Do you understand that? So really important. That's why we have a Vatican, to help us to understand what we truly believe. We'll be back tomorrow with part 2 of this horrible story, and we'll see you then. Have a blessed day. Life can be challenging, but amidst the trials and tribulations, there is wisdom to be found. Welcome to Sirach 2, a chapter filled with timeless guidance and insights from the book of Sirach. In this chapter, we learn the importance of remaining steadfast in our faith, even in the face of adversity. It teaches us to be patient, for trials can shape our character and lead to spiritual growth. Seeking wisdom and understanding is of utmost importance. Sirach 2 reminds us to study the teachings of the wise, be open to correction, and follow God's commandments. By doing so, we can find true fulfillment and blessings. Don't be discouraged by the temporary prosperity of the wicked or the challenges you may face. Trust in God's justice, for he rewards those who diligently seek him. Join us on this journey of faith as we discover the path to a meaningful and fulfilling life. Sirach 2 is your roadmap to wisdom, patience, and eternal blessings. Read Sirach 2 and let its timeless wisdom guide you through life's ups and downs. Available now in the book of Sirach, part of the Old Testament. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer, previews of upcoming podcasts, previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com, your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. So one of the things we can look at as we see this particular week is, and if you want to make a comment on the podcast in any way, and don't forget to subscribe and comment, that really helps our podcast, is how do you understand elements of your faith that are well-defined, and how does that affect what you believe, and what teachings have you heard that you may disagree with that someone has taught you, or you may have seen it from the church, and why do you disagree? And these are a couple things to look into. Why do you disagree? And if you leave a comment, by the way, and you put that down, I will look into whether or not the teaching that you disagree with is in fact Catholic teaching. So you might say, well, Father so-and-so or Mr. so-and-so or Ms. so-and-so or Mrs. so-and-so, whatever phrase you want to use, or title is actually the word, they say this, that, and the other thing, but I'm not sure if that's Catholic teaching. Well, put the comment down. Let me know what you think. That reminds me, maybe it's time for me to start a Patreon not a Patreon, I already have a Patreon. You can put it, or maybe I should start a Discord server. I think we're coming to a point where I should do that, where people can make comments and stuff like that. But that hasn't started yet. In any case, have yourself a blessed day. We're going to look at part 2 of this story from Maccabees tomorrow, so we'll see what it says. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.